Gifted education is a special needs area. So just as you have, so if you look at a bell curve, for example, which is what all populations, small or big, will fall loosely into if you actually give them a test. You'll find a lot of people sitting in the average, and then you have the ends of the spectrum where it narrows out, and you have a very small population of children sitting with learning disability, and you have a small number of children sitting with giftedness. So they are the opposite ends of the spectrum. Let me also hasten to say that sometimes these go together. So you might have a lot of children with learning disability who are also gifted. Now there are complexities like that in that population. What typically happens is, because the teacher is teaching to this average in the middle, these sections which are in the minority are forgotten, often forgotten, or they are not catered to. Giftedness more than LD, because LD at least is in your face, so you can see the problem and you can't really skirt it. Whereas the gifted end of the spectrum will be quite comfortable in passing your tests. That doesn't mean that they'll do well. So there are underperforming, even failing gifted children who have not been identified, and I think that is one of the bigger complexities of gifted children and their problem. Now that end of the spectrum, which is a special needs spectrum and needs a differentiated curriculum, needs attention. Now the traits of a gifted child is where you will find maybe 2 or 3 grade levels higher, 2 or 3 grade levels higher in your academic work, or it could be a high level of empathy, a high level of aesthetics, unusual focus on something that the child is doing, unusual curiosity. So anything where you find that they are away from your average mark by a long stretch is where you would start looking at the child for giftedness. You will also find behavior that is not quite normal in terms of the way in which they react to things. They're extremely sensitive people, so they carry a lot of pain in their minds. So you will have various kinds of giftedness is not one thing. Giftedness has several aspects to it, and not all of these will be found in one person. So that's another thing to remember. You don't get every trait sitting in one person. Giftedness also suffers from the tragedy of people looking at it glamorously. So if you are looking at giftedness, you are only seeing this precocious or this prodigious child who can do amazing, feats that other children cannot do, and you're carried away by that. You're carried away by the IQ. So you're asking me what is his IQ? Is it 180? Is it 200? So you get caught up in these numbers. Parents do too. So they are more concerned about telling you, how amazing the child is than looking at what should we do with the child. It's not always a question of feeding his cerebral appetite, let me tell you. He has problems with his socio-emotional life. So a lot of children are not socially comfortable, they're not socially functional. A lot of them are emotionally very fragile. So you have issues there where the human being, this child, is extremely unhappy. So he is not thrilled with his gifts, or he is not proud of it, or he is not showing off. He is a human being who's scared inside because he understands he's different. He understands that the world is looking at him strangely. Sometimes they are praising him to the skies, and he thinks probably one day I'll get caught out. I'm not any of these things. You know what I'm saying? So he grows up with this huge amount of emotional, social baggage sometimes, and comes either to a point of rebellion, or God forbid, becomes depressive, becomes suicidal, gets into criminal activity because there is intelligence and it needs channelization. The best way to get it out is to do activities that are illegal, which is thrilling, but at the same time fulfills this need for creativity. So you have those kind of issues, or people who can't keep jobs, or people who can't keep relationships, but everyone can see that they are extremely intelligent. Now these are your typical gifted children who have, you know, fallen by the wayside. And I think we need to address those needs instantly. But having said all this, giftedness, gifted programs or understanding of gifted education in India is just not happening. In the sense that I think it's too early to even put these concepts here. India is not ready for it. So Mindsprings does programs, gifted programs. We've done gifted programs in a large number of schools in the city, but most of them have been after school. So it gets relegated to this place where you're saying it's like a ballet class or like a chess class or it's like learning Spanish. And parents typically switch between, okay, this year we've done gifted, next year we'll do Spanish. It's like that. So the value of that program in terms of the advanced rigor of learning, in terms of the child doing original work, in terms of thinking during a discussion, using a large variety of material that might come from anthropology or economics or history or psychology, that sort of thing. I'm talking of primary children, thinking in terms of philosophical stories to you know, activate their moral compass, if you like. All those kind of essential learning skills don't really hold much for the population here in terms of parents and teachers or principals, boards, etc., because they are on this tunnel vision to a 90% mark. So they're constantly looking for avenues where that will get accented rather than looking for this kind of development. But children who develop great skills in gifted education, you will find that it's almost automatic. So if you put something in front of them, their divergent and convergent thinking must be, it should almost be like a muscle that is involuntary. And you should be able to think of solutions. Then you're able to think of solutions for anything. So if I'm going to make you do it with a brick, and then I'm going to make you do it with a pen or a shopping trolley, tomorrow if you're going to buy a house or you're going to marry a man, your mind is going to move into several spaces in an automatic way. And that is where the mind has become this really, really well-toned muscle that has moved forward. But coming back to their emotional and social states, I think intervention is needed. A lot of times when cerebral hunger is assuaged to some extent, you will find that the social emotional child who gets some kind of counseling is able to get himself up and going. He has approval, he has validation, which doesn't happen otherwise in the classroom. And the goal of gifted education is really for him to be a fulfilled human being, to be content, not necessarily in the success that we normally define, but in ways in which internally, no matter what he does, he's a person who is happy. So happiness is the goal of gifted education.